And next speaker out is Robert Jensen. He's a professor at the Department of Physics here in Tromsø and director of the research center Visual Intelligence. His research interests are within the development of deep artificial neural networks for image analysis, and he's active at the intersection of health and technology by leveraging AI for decision and diagnosis support. Vær så god, Robert.
Thank you so much, Kajsa. Much appreciated. So the aim for me right now is to tell you a little bit about decision support, or at least the path towards decision support in healthcare and also medical image analysis within the context of visual intelligence and machine learning. So visual intelligence is this big research center that I will now tell you a little bit more about. So the plan is a brief background, provide a little bit of context, especially with respect to the research group on machine learning here at UIT, which is the core group behind the Research Center Visual Intelligence. Then move into the background and the aim of the Research Center Visual Intelligence, and then come to the core business of the science and the research that we are doing together with our close friends and collaborators in the health domain. So the machine learning group at UIT has been built stone by stone, step by step, over time, over several years, from scratch, basically. And our main and core business is to develop new ways to do data analysis, basically, on complex, difficult data, non-standard data, to do inference, to try to extract knowledge and help make decisions based on that. So we publish in our field. It's a big field. And what I can say is that all technology starts with foundational research in machine learning, computational statistics, pattern recognition, and so on. So everything we hear about that becomes implemented somewhere started as foundational research, for instance, in machine learning groups like ours. So that's important for me to convey. As a research group, we work on different applications and domains, also in industry, several companies. But the most dominant application has been health, so machine learning for health. And many projects over the year, very generous support from the Research Council of Norway, the EU system, Helse Nord, the big research program, which is called 180 Degrees North, and which we will hear more about from the next speaker, and several other such centers and UIT's strategic fund, and so on. And also this new research center, Visual Intelligence. I'll come back to that in a second. You heard yesterday from Cristina Soguero Ruiz from the University Rey Juan Carlos in Madrid about research on electronic health records, decision support in that domain. And we've been a part of much of that work. So you've heard about this a little bit. Close collaboration with our good friends at University Hospital of North Norway. And basically trying to do the best we can with routinely stored, generated data in the hospital system in electronic health records. I'm not going to repeat everything you heard from before. As I mentioned yesterday, in this path, research, foundational research, innovations, collaboration, interdisciplinary health, we've done really well. And I think this is nice for us in North Norway and Norway as a whole. We can really make an impact in this field. And of course, when it comes to SPKI, it's all about taking this research the next step further and to have even more methods actually into operational use. Like, for instance, the previous speaker talked about, very interesting from Japan. So to have more basically products like that. So I said that I'm really happy about this. Actually, I just want to sort of brag a little bit about Stanford receiving the same award, the same time that we received our award from the same association, International Medical Informatics Association. So it was UIT and Stanford that year. Very happy about that. Now we started a new project together with DIPS, the company here in North Norway. It's all about electronic health records. It's about medical image analysis, and it's about trying to make progress in machine learning, AI for health. So from this build-up and always in collaboration, we recently started a few months ago, had the kickoff of visual intelligence. So this is a so-called Center for Research-Based Innovation. It's obtained in competition. All the best groups in Norway compete to then receive major funding, almost 100 million kroner from the Research Council of Norway, to do user-motivated research. So that means there are companies, public institutions, they have problems, real data, need to do something and need to collaborate with us in machine learning to try to do something about this. So visual intelligence has a primary focus on image analysis, but of course we treat all kinds of sources of data as important and useful in addition to images. And we have a major component in health. So I mentioned this yesterday, for instance, here in Tromsø, University Hospital North Norway, Helse Nord IKT. We also have Kreftregisteret, Cancer Registry as a very important partner, and also General Electric, Ving med ultrasound in Horten, but also with offices in Oslo and so on. So anyway, really exciting. One thing which is very important about this center is that it's a major component in health, but not only health, because also other domains of society, for instance, the marine sciences, satellite, image analysis, energy, share challenges when it comes to analyzing this kind of data when we talk about the next decade. So we have really fundamental research challenges that we need to solve. We need to make better systems to analyze data based on fewer what we call annotated data points. So we don't really have this ground truth in many cases that we need to train our artificial intelligence systems from. We need to do something else. We need to incorporate any prior knowledge into the systems. We should not forget, the knowledge invested over decades, human knowledge that should go into these systems. And also to have these systems have the ability to explain themselves and also to say something about the uncertainty that they experience when they try to make predictions. So this is really important, and it's also beyond health. But as I said, health is really important for our center. And for the time being, this could change over time, but predominantly three main applications. So one is computational pathology. So Lars Ailo Bongo gave you a little bit of a hint about this yesterday. I won't go too much into this, maybe next time. Then also when it comes to cancer research, very much focus on that. I'll come back to that in a second. And also, especially together with GE Ving med ultrasound, intelligent ultrasound scanners. It's all about the heart, cardiac research, trying to say something about the health, well-being of the patient, but also to develop the next generation medical equipment. So these are some of the things we are concerned about. All right, so let me try to convey some concrete aspects of our work together with our collaborators. So, so now I'm switching a little bit gears. It's a little bit connected to the first speaker today. So it's medical imaging, PET, MR, and especially hybrid modalities. So when we have PET, for instance, but we also have MR acquired at the same time, and this is a little bit new. So this is in collaboration with the PET Center and, for instance, Rune Sundset, which is here in the audience today, where we have the latest equipment, and it's all about trying to leverage this equipment, the medical imaging, try to do our best when it comes to data analysis. And what we're talking about here is to try to find tumors in the lung. So basically what we call to segment out the tumor. And this is in order for the clinician to have help, not to replace a clinician, but as a tool to support the clinician. But this is not an easy problem. And especially if you're not in the standard setting where you have, for some reason, a clinician that has made this kind of ground truth, or have labeled lots of instances. Okay, here we have a voxel or pixel with a tumor. Here we do not have that, and then have done this for thousands of images, thousands of patients. This is very often not realistic. And that's where our research challenges come into play, to do this in a different way, which is more sustainable and more relevant for the future. And then to lay the groundwork for the technology that will come in a few years, or that's already here, and that could be implemented due to, for instance, our work. All right, so in our problem, we don't have that many patients, actually. This is collaboration also with NTNU, only like about 18. But we have PET scans, we have MR scans, and when we talk about voxels, these volume elements inside the body, it's many of those. So when you think like that, it's actually quite a lot of data, and not a little data when you just think about the number of persons that, or patients that we have in this cohort. But we don't have this ground truth. So we can't train our artificial intelligence system in the standard way. And this is where you have to do something new. So this is Stina, as you can see here, Samuel, and also Mikael, main force behind this work. All right, so the essence here is that while other types of methods in the past have tried to do this kind of analysis patient by patient. So to try to segment out tumors, one patient at a time based on their data, individually and separately, we do something else. So we try to basically put all these voxels from all these patients together, and then leverage on the strength of the combined data, and not only one patient at a time, but also the fact that we have these two modalities. So is it possible to find the tumor in a better way by utilizing both the information from the PET scans and also the MR scans? So this is new. This is something that people have not really studied from before. So not so important here, but we have also innovations when it comes to how we pre-process the data through something called super voxels. The main thing here is what you can see over here, that we utilize data from both PET and MR, and this is new. Without going into details, you can see that in the end, we come to this point where we have basically gathered data from all of these patients at the same time at once as a new thing. And then we do something called clustering in this space of data, which now incorporates both the PET and the MR. And when we do it this way, and we do this final step of clustering, it turns out that what you can see here on your right-hand side is to actually find for each patient the tumors, and to do it really well. Much better than people have done before in this problem, missing very few tumors, although some of the smallest ones are difficult also for our method to capture. So this is one type of work, and this you can envision being, with the right approval, implemented as a tool to sit sort of next to a clinician and try to help figure out what's going on. So I think this could be done. to also take the next step. And we also have several other interesting things going on, similar to this, and the next speaker will tell you a little bit more about this. Another project we're now starting in visual intelligence, together with the University Hospital of North Norway, especially surgeon Keyur Radia. He was here yesterday, maybe he's here today also. And Kim Mortensen, is to try to, based on AI, say something about the spread of cancer, especially in the intestines, to the liver. So this is not good if you have this spread, metastasis, and there are no really good systems today to try to capture this spread. And we have, through our collaborators, very interesting data. So from CT, for quite a lot of patients over time. So this is longitudinal data where after surgery, patients are followed up, screened, and we have access to these data sources. But again, the problem is we don't really have this ground truth that you normally think that you would need to have in AI. So we need to do something else to solve this problem when we are in this constraint of having limited data to work on. So what we're envisioning to do here is to go into radiology reports, which is in the electronic health record, DIPS system, to try to find, based on words or text in those reports, what we call weak annotations or weak labels. They're kind of noisy, they are not so strong compared to if a human labeled the pixels in the CT images. Do we have metastasis or not? But this could be the only thing we have to work on, and hopefully this could give good enough results that this could be a decision support tool in practice someday. This is just started. PhD student Erik Østmo, and as I said, Keyur in charge of this project. So one example of exciting things going on. Finally, with Christopher here on your left and Mikael. So the previous speaker talked about explainability and in endoscopy and gastrointestinal surgery. So this work is connected to that actually. So now we're trying to basically solve one of these fundamental research challenges that has to do with interpretability in medical image analysis. So this is a challenge. So there has been studies showing that in some cases, AI systems trained, as we call it, on certain types of data can be fooled by the data if there are some artifacts or some strange things within the data that the method picks up on, but which is not really related to the medical problem itself. So here, for instance, it turned out that the system, medical system based on AI, trained on certain images from a certain hospital, it just so happened that on these particular images, this metal token was inserted in the shoulder of the patient. And the system picked up on this metal token. It appeared that the system worked very well, but actually the people with the condition had the metal. People without the condition did not have the metal. So in the end, discrimination was based on this metal thing, and this system would fail if transferred to another problem, another hospital. So this is a hot topic in machine learning, how to provide explainable AI to guide, give clinicians some kind of help. Very little work. So this is based on kind of toy data. An example of some work where you can see that a method, not trying to go into details, try to provide an explanation. So try to say that, okay, these pixels that you can see are highlighted, they are important for our artificial neural network to categorize this image as a cat. So this is one example of explainable AI. However, these methods are not good at saying something about how sure they are that this explanation is very certain. Maybe it's an uncertain explanation, and this is what we have explored within the context of segmentation detecting polyps from colonoscopy images as a case study. So here you see an input, and here you see the ground truth in this case. So now it's all about interpretability. So actually, in this case, we have this ground truth. So it's a little bit different scenario compared to what I talked about a few seconds ago. So now you see that based on one of these methods from other people that try to provide explainable AI, you can see that for our system to predict the polyp right there, where you can see it, it highlighted these green pixels as being important. Our question was, are all of these green pixels equally important? Or maybe we are more uncertain about some of those than others. So what we did was something we called Monte Carlo guided backpropagation. Don't worry about this title. The key thing is to utilize a component, an inherent property of artificial neural networks. We can kind of look at them as what we call ensemble methods, where basically thousands of networks go together to provide the final prediction. And what we did was basically to let this ensemble of networks try to say how much do they agree on these pixels being important or not. If they don't really agree on the importance, then we have an uncertain explainable region. So here you can see the result of this. So with the best methods from the past, the clinician would be presented this. Okay, these green pixels are the important ones in order to detect this polyp. With our method, you see that we will say that, okay, these pixels are important in order for the prediction to be a polyp. However, trust more these green pixels compared to these red ones. They are flagged as important, but we are not really sure how important they are. Okay, so this is something new in this field. So anyway, these are the kind of things we are working on. It's super exciting. And I think that we here in the north of Norway and Norway as a whole have a really good opportunity to make an impact in the future in this field and really to lead the way. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Robert. We have some questions for you from Slido. What approach that you are working on is closest to finding its way into the clinic, in your opinion?
Yeah, okay, so that's a really good question. So a few years back, so together with, for instance, Rolf Ole Linseth-Moe, Arthur Revhøg. So we did work based on electronic health records, and you heard a little bit about that from Cristina Soguero-Ruiz, and I mentioned it also today, try to detect patients at risk for adverse events. So this we kind of, I think, have been regretting that we didn't push a little bit further. I think this actually could be very close by just a bit more effort, but we haven't really pushed that way, and that's what I hope that SPKI can give us the resources to push. And then I think in several of these medical applications, past history, other groups, other places have shown that in specialized instances, it is actually quite a short path in many ways to implementation. But if we think as a whole, all kinds of problems, all kinds of data, then there is an implementation gap. But in specialized problems, there are many approved AI-based methods in use, and some of those we are working on can also make it.
And when you say that, so you kind of regret that you didn't push it, but what specifically was missing? Was it like money, people with the competence, or?
Yeah, so it's a little bit like what David Clifton said yesterday. So for instance, in visual intelligence, the big research program. So our job is to lay a foundation for innovations. And it's done together with users. But then there's something about enabling the users in collaboration with us to take those innovations into use, because it's kind of not maybe our job as a research group in academia. It's something about having the mechanisms to take that step further. This is what we are now, of course, trying to do with the SBKI, to make this big investment in research, hopefully have an impact by making it into implementation. The big companies, it's a little bit different because they live on commercial products. So you could think that they maybe already have systems and pipelines to a larger degree to maybe have a shorter path from research to implementation. But I think for us, maybe in the public sector and maybe in healthcare, we have to make those systems now. And now it's a time to do that.
So an academic researcher can only push an idea so far, and then someone from the clinic needs to pick it up.
Well, I think a little bit like Ira said yesterday, I think we have to think a little bit like that in research, we have implementation in mind. And then we do the next step where we implement, but we have the research also in mind, and it's integrated into also that process. So this sequential thinking of, okay, some academic people do this, leave it, then somebody picks it up and takes it further. That's, I think, not the way forward. We need to have a more like coherent approach to this. And I think this is where we are going. I like this slide and comment by Ira yesterday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So moving on to Stian Anfinsen. He's head of the machine learning group at UIT and associate professor at the Department of Physics. He is leading research activities on energy analytics and machine learning for oncological imaging. And he's also heavily involved in the Norwegian Nuclear Medicine Consortium.
Thank you very much, Kajsa. And thank you to Robert for giving you an introduction to the machine learning group and the Visual Intelligence Center. So that sets the scene for what I'm going to talk about, which is one particular project that we're working on. And I have to say that it's a little bit scary to stand here today. You look like a very nice crowd, but I'm slightly outside my field of expertise, talking about medical imaging modalities, medical research. I'm more a machine learner, but that's why I added a subtitle to my talk. We are doing deep learning, but it has been a lot of steep learning, trying to get into the field, but luckily we have a lot of good guidance, as I will get back to very soon. So I'm going to talk about this project, 180 degrees north. Maybe some of you have heard a lot about it before, but I'll give you an introduction, give you a very short history lesson to introduce it, then go on to talking about the machine learning work package, which is a part of that. All right, so let's start. PET scanning in Norway started a long time ago. On the map you see where and when it started in different locations, Oslo, then Bergen, Tromsø, finally Trondheim. And in the beginning, radio tracers were produced first in Helsinki, flown to Tromsø. The PET scanner was sitting on a trailer which was traveling Scandinavia. And I think they used it every 2 weeks. It was here in Tromsø, with those tracers that came in from Helsinki and had to be used in a very short time. Later on, they started producing in Oslo. But now it's a whole different story, because in 2018, the PET imaging center was opened at UN. And in the pictures, you see Rune Sundset, who is here today, the leader of the PET Center, together with the benefactor Trond Mohn, which funded the PET centers in Tromsø, Trondheim, and Bergen, opened by the Prime Minister. Inside, there are facilities for preclinical research, for clinical work, and also there's a cyclotron to produce the radio tracers right there. Okay, so while this center was being built, the leaders of the PET centers in Tromsø, Trondheim, and Bergen got together and started planning the next step. They had got the facilities. Now they were applying to Trond Mohn again for money for research, to do research with these facilities. And we got that. And that is the 180 degrees North project, also known as the Norwegian Nuclear Imaging Consortium. So it's a collaboration between Bergen, Trondheim, and Tromsø, where the tasks are split. In Bergen, they are producing radio tracers. In Trondheim, they are doing clinical research. In Tromsø, we are focusing on preclinical research. And in this Tromsø project, we have one work package which is focusing on machine learning. They also have one work package in Trondheim that we are collaborating with on machine learning. There's no machine learning in Bergen in 180 degrees North, which does not mean that they are not doing machine learning. Actually, they have a head start. They have started such work much earlier than us. And we are also in contact with Bergen. So this is the Tromsø team. We have 4 work packages, one on lung cancer, one on brain cancer, and one on breast cancer. And then there's the machine learning work package, for which I have been the work package leader. Right. And we are doing preclinical research using these machines here. We have a PET SPECT CT scanner. In the lower left corner, you see a mouse in a tube, which is then inserted into this scanner. We also have this PET MR scanner here. There you see Trond Mohn together with Matthias Krantz, one of the researchers at the PET Center, who is working on the brain cancer work package, scanning mouse brains, as you see here in this MR image. Yeah. And then we have this machine learning work package that I'm going to talk about. But first of all, I need to say something about the PET imaging research that we have done at the machine learning group prior to the 180 degrees North project. So early in, at an early stage of the PET core facility in Tromsø, they employed a young Swedish medical physicist. This is Samuel at the left here, who were not only working to build up the core facility, PET core facility here in Tromsø, but he was also very interested in image analysis and machine learning, and started applying for a Ph.D. project to do research in machine learning. So he went to the regional health authorities, and they said that your application is good, but it's too far from the clinic and clinical use. But he was persistent, and finally he got funded by UIT, the health faculty, and he was supervised by Rune Sundset here and Robert, the previous talker. And then he defended his defense successfully 2-3 weeks back. And I'm going to talk about the work he has done, because it really sets the scene for what we are going to do in this machine learning work package. All right. Before doing that, let me say a few words about PET, what it is. So PET imaging, in PET imaging, you inject a radioactive substance which emits positrons. They react with their antibodies, electrons, and you get photons going in opposite directions. So 180 degrees at a 180 degrees angle, which gives the name to the 180 degrees North project. And then you can detect these photons in the PET scanner, the detectors there, and you can locate where it originates from. So that's very briefly what is PET. So what Samuel was working with was PET quantification, trying to quantify the SUV, as it says here, the standardized uptake value, how much radioactivity is taken up in different parts of the body. And as you see in the image to the left, when we look at different organs, different parts of the body, we can measure the uptake of radioactivity in them, and we can draw these curves of how the concentration of radioactivity develops over time. But there's a lot of challenges in PET quantification that Samuel was working with in his thesis. Many of these challenges were mentioned in the first talk today by Habib Saidi, who went through a lot of impressive research, a lot of papers that they have done in Geneva. Samuel has worked on many of the same things. I'm going to go through it a little bit slower, so to see what implications this might have in the clinic. The first one was attenuation correction. So attenuation correction is correcting for the absorption of the positrons in tissue. So tissue between the detector and the emission source, because different tissue, fat, water had different density, and some of the positrons are attenuated, so it's dampened, which affects the signal, and unless you correct for this, you get a wrong image of the actual activity and the metabolism. So to do that, we use MR images to create an attenuation map, but we can get a lot of artifacts. We see some artifacts here to the left. There's truncation of the image. We don't really see the whole arms of this body. By the way, this is a lung cancer study. Then you have another effect here. If there are metal implants in the body, you can get these effects where it looks like the chest is not, there's a hole in the chest, which is of course not real, which has to be corrected for, such that you get one absorption outside the body and one inside the lungs. And then we have to add bones that are not seen by the MR image here. And the work of Samuel was to try to quantify the effect of these artifacts. And what he found was that the absence of bone and the absence and this truncation artifact, because of the arms not being visible, they are not so important. They have a small effect on the standardized uptake value that we are measuring. But the effect of the susceptibility artifact due to metal implants is significant, and it leads to inconsistent underestimation of the standardized uptake value. So which has impact both for tumor therapy response, but also for the training of machine learning based prediction models. If we try to train it with the wrong data, we get rubbish out. So this needs inspection. We need to inspect and correct the attenuation maps. All right, in this next work, Samuel was trying to replace biopsies with virtual or digital biopsies using PET images. So what we want to do is to take a PET image, extract tumor features, so-called radiomics from the image, use them in a machine learning prediction model, and then perform predictions. The problem here is that the patient is breathing, because this scan here, this image that we see up here is a 20-minute free breathing PET. And because of the breathing and the movement of the patient, this tumor looks elongated, while it should look like this. This is more realistic. So how can we get rid of the effect? Can we extract radiomics that are invariant to breathing, to the movement of the patient? So Samuel investigated a lot of different image features. He found 43 motion robust radiomics features that can be used in machine learning prediction models, which can be derived then from these free breathing PET images. There will be no need for time-consuming motion correction. Finally, for his two last papers, he was working on tracer kinetic modeling in dynamic PET. So dynamic PET, when you have time series of PET images, you have the additional challenge that in order to quantify the glucose metabolism in this case, you need to model the tracer transmission. So the tracer is injected into the blood, but then is transmitted into tissue. So you need to model this transmission. You typically model the body as different sections that have a homogeneous tracer concentration. In each of these organs or compartments, sections of the body, you can measure these time activity curves, see how the radioactivity changes with time. So this is a so-called compartment model where you try to relate the radioactivity concentration in the blood to the radioactivity in tissue and in cells. But that means we need to know the concentration in the blood. And how do you do that? Well, you need to do arterial cannulation. In humans, it's invasive. Well, it's always invasive, but it can be done. It's time consuming. In mice, it's really, really difficult. There's only a few research groups in the world that can do that because it requires surgery and it's a terminal procedure. So what if we could get rid of this arterial cannulation to measure the radioactive concentration in the blood? What if we can derive this number here just from the image? Well, it appears that we can. And that's exactly what Samuel is doing. So he's using as input these time activity curves that he is measuring in different organs. And then he is using machine learning to predict the so-called arterial input function. And then we are able to calibrate our time series of radioactivity concentration and use them to compare across different images in the time series and across different scans at different times. So this is really an innovation, I would say, which was also the remark made by his opponents at his defense, that this is something that we really also want to use in our further work in the 180 degrees north project. So that's what I'm going to talk about for my remaining minutes. We have been interviewing the work package leaders of the medical work package, trying to get them to tell us, what do you want us to do for you? Then we have this lung cancer work package, where they want us to build prediction models for response to lung cancer therapy. So they are working a lot with immunotherapy, also looking at radiation therapy. So they want us to extract radiomics and make prediction models to try to predict the outcome of the therapy. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say about that. Work package 2, that's the brain cancer work package, where what we are trying to do is to detect the onset of change due to the tumor. So we first see the tumor in the MRI image because right there is the tumor after 8 days. You see it because there's a damage in the tissue due to the needle, the injection. Later on, at day 20 and 28, we see the tumor growing in the mouse. So what we are going to do is to try to extract time activity data, try to segment out tumors, and try to see if we can find radiomics that helps us detect the onset of change, the tumor growth, to see if the machine learning methods can see things that we cannot see ourselves. Finally, for the third and last medical work package, we are collaborating with these researchers that are working on nanomedicine. So they are injecting nanoparticles breast cancer tumors and want to use them for diagnostics. So these nanoparticles are taken up and accumulated by the breast cancer tumor by different mechanisms, and it's difficult to quantify the contribution of the different mechanisms. But the hypothesis here is that the accumulation procedures have different kinetics, such as one process will have a gradual binding in the tumor cell, and it's hypothesized that the other process will have more of a stepwise uptake. And if we can disentangle these processes and their contribution to the PET signal, then we can help them quantify how these different processes contribute and how this nanomedicine works. So that's, that's what we are planning to do. We want to build on the research from Samuel's thesis, in particular this work on machine learning derived input functions. We are in contact with a research group in Canada. They actually can do this arterial cannulation. So we will get ground truth data from them on preclinical data. We want to pursue some of our own ideas. I think I'll just skip that right now, but we also want to, as I outline now, support the other medical work package and let them not dictate, but tell us what do they want us to do. We want to strengthen our collaboration with Trondheim and Bergen, because a lot of good things are being done at all locations, but we need to share. And to do all this, we really need more people. So right now we have a postdoc sitting right here, Luigi, like me. He doesn't have a medical background, but he's a machine learner. We have Samuel, who's working at the PET center, but also a member of the machine learning group. We're trying to get more people, master students, PhDs, because we see a lot of potential tasks that we can work on. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much. Let me just thank all these people who have contributed with slides. I've stolen a lot of slides from Samuel's defense and also from Rune Sundset and images from Luigi. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Stian. So we have some questions from Slido. One picking up on Robert's mentioning on translational research again, and wants to know, since you come from energy analytics, do you see any nice things that translate into this project?
Energy analytics is a lot about prediction models. There's a lot of time series there. So yes, I do see a lot of the methodology from energy analytics can be used there. So prediction models for time series, yes, goes well along with this. But I see my background is I used to work with satellite images. And Luigi, the postdoc in this project, he was doing his PhD on satellite images, trying to translate between different modalities. And we're going to do that as well. That's some of our own ideas that we want to pursue. Try to translate a PET image or a CT image into an MR image back. So we have three modalities. We have PET, CT, and MR. Can we use that information together? Data fusion, going back and forth. We can use that. We have ideas.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. We'll move on.
Yep.
In the program. So the next speaker, she will participate digitally. Julia Schnabel. She's professor of computational imaging and AI in medicine, and visited Tromsø as a keynote speaker at the Northern Light Deep Learning workshop in 2020. Her research interests are in image reconstruction image quality, motion modeling, segmentation, and classification tasks. She will give a talk on AI-enabled medical imaging.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my slides.
We don't see your slides, but we see you.
Okay, try again. Okay. No. It worked yesterday, so I'll try again. Okay. Is that better?
Yes, now we see your slide.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. I was just thinking back about enjoying the Northern Light Conference as the last actual international meeting I physically visited before lockdown, so I'm very sorry to miss the midnight suns, but I just checked your weather report. I don't think it's very sunny right now where you are. Anyway, I've recently joined Helmholtz Center Munich and TU Munich, but the work I'll be presenting on AI-enabled medical imaging was mostly done at King's College London, but I will continue on those lines of work and will remain affiliated with King's. So first I want to do some disclosures. I would like to thank all the funders who have contributed to some of the research which I'm going to talk about. And then I want to talk a little bit about AI-enabled imaging. So normally in medical imaging and also in machine learning applications using medical images, we fall into one of the following distinct groups. We either work on image acquisition, where we want to make imaging faster using just looking at how we can better generate raw data from the imaging sensor, or we want to improve image reconstruction. You've seen some work earlier in the sessions on improving PET imaging, for example, where we want to transform the raw sensor data into an image which we can actually view and present to the radiologist. Or we work on image, what's sometimes called post-processing, but it's mainly the field I'm falling in, where we just work on ready-made images for us, which we want to filter, segment, register, and so on. The next step is a bit more abstract, where we want to analyze the images, we want to construct models, we want to improve the understanding of the images, we detect and classify disease, or we just look at images, and that's the clinicians who just interpret the images. But these are very distinct steps normally, going from scanner to the clinician. But machine learning is now increasingly applied within each of these groups. But there's this huge potential to also apply it across these groups in a more coherent manner. And this is what I call AI-enabled medical imaging. In computer vision, AI has been ubiquitous. It's not a new concept, but it's only recently due to compute power and more annotated databases that it has really kicked off. So lots of these images, ImageNet being the most famous one, have really set the groundwork for people to try out finally those deep neural networks which have been developed in the late 1980s, 90s. And simple tasks, I'm just talking about fairly straightforward concepts today, would be to classify images as to what they contain. Is there a dog in the image, or is there a cat? And so these are normally encoder networks that are used for classification, or you could also use them for regression. And if you kind of mirror that network, then you have an encoder-decoder architecture. And these networks are super popular in solving segmentation tasks, so basically delineating the cat in the image in this case, or to denoise images, or filter images, and also to reconstruct images. Now in medical imaging, we've got completely different data. We've got different imaging modalities. You've seen a lot of PET images today. You've seen endoscopy and so forth. This is a senior MRI short axis view of the heart. But we can apply machine learning concepts to any of these modalities quite straightforwardly, but not necessarily good enough to solve a clinical question. So we can actually do a simple classification task. We can say, is that image good enough so we can actually present it to a radiologist, or that they can look at a certain disease and make a good diagnosis. And again, you can use an encoder architecture for that. You can also use to segment the image. For example, you can segment the myocardium, the left or right ventricle, and simple encoder-decoder networks have been really popular and continue to be popular in the medical imaging world. So the UNet, because of the shape of this network, which also has some skipping connections, has been proven to be hugely successful. And of course, image reconstruction is still really important. You can use it just to denoise images, filter images, but you can also operate directly in the sensor domain if you wanted. And these are the approaches which I think are really exciting, where you can actually go straight from the image sensing data to whatever it is you want to do as your further downstream task. And I will show some of those examples in the talk. Now, we've got a lot of challenges in medical imaging, and AI is really trying to come to the rescue. But some of the challenges are related to the image quality, because we've got image artifacts, we've got patient motion, we've got respiratory motion, we've got changes going on in the patients due to their disease patterns. We also do not always have these really nice, well-curated, large, annotated databases like ImageNet in the medical world. So we have to work with something smaller and make do with that. And that's even more complicated by the fact that clinical data, by definition, is more varied. It's very patient-specific. But also, we've got huge differences across different scanning systems and different hospital sites, so we have to accommodate for those. And of course, the general problem, which was mentioned earlier on in one of the talks, is that deep learning, the most popular machine learning technology currently, is kind of a black box approach. So we don't really have as much interpretability as we could wish for. But that's a generic problem, which I think will be here to stay with us and work on for a long time. So in this talk, I want to talk about AI-enabled imaging as a means to apply machine learning along the entire imaging pipeline, from acquisition to image interpretation. And we can work on modular approaches, looking at the individual steps in between and just concatenate them, work on acquisition and work on reconstruction and so forth, but in the end, put everything into one nice pipeline. Or we can work on end-to-end approaches, try to solve several of these things simultaneously. I'll look into two examples today. One is on cardiac MR imaging, and the other one is on chest CT for lung cancer. So that's maybe a synergy to one of the earlier talks this morning. And the things I'm focusing on for machine learning is really on how can we do some realistic data augmentation to tackle the lack of availability of larger database, and use that also to improve image quality and perform image quality control. So image quality can really affect further downstream tasks, for example, segmentation. So on the left, you see a really nice, well-defined cardiac image, a short axis view, and the resulting segmentation clearly color labeled for you for the myocardium, left and right ventricle. But if that image quality isn't that great, as you see on the right-hand side, and you would just apply your normal encoder-decoder, UNet-style segmentation network, machine learning to it, you would get a really suboptimal segmentation. So what do we do there? Well, we could normally send, call back in the patient, say we have to do that image again, which is difficult, which might delay diagnosis and treatment. Or we could say, well, let's try and improve the image quality. Could we at least detect it quite quickly? So if we do that, we might be able to improve the segmentation. So in this case, we artificially degraded the high quality image to produce a low quality image just to see what happens. So you see the difference to the original image on the bottom left, and on the right hand side, you see an image which we managed to restore. And then you see the segmentation on the bottom right. Now you have to be quite eagle-eyed, especially if you've got a small monitor to look at, to see the differences between the resulting segmentation and the original segmentation from the high quality image. But there are some differences, but still it's much more workable, probably close enough to what the clinicians would do manually, that we can be satisfied with that result. So if you want to correct for these artifacts, so how do we do that? For that, it's quite helpful to try and understand where these artifacts come from in the first place. And that requires some understanding of the underlying image physics, and of the image acquisition process, and sometimes also of the disease patterns, the patient physiology and so forth. So you see here a good quality image, an image which has been, a real image which has been compromised by a motion artifact. And they kind of look like different size and shape. Let me see what I can put on the torch. I think there's this thing here somewhere. Oops, no. Oops, I switched on subtitles, which I've never done before. Sorry. How do I get out of this? Oh dear. I think I'll stay like this. I'm sorry. I just think I just keep going. Just please don't be irritated by the subtitles. So on the right hand side, you see a motion artifact, which is actually due to seeing different image sequences, different temporal frames of the scene sequence at the same time. So there's a motion blur, where on the left hand side you see an almost static view of the heart taken at one particular time point in the cardiac cycle. On the right hand side, something clearly has gone wrong. So one artifact which you can see here can be explained by understanding how the images are acquired. So cardiac images are acquired by using ECG triggering and gradually filling up the case space, basically the sensor domain, if you want, the frequency, spatial frequency domain of the data across the temporal cycle of the heart. So it's not done one frame at a time, it's done across frames, and you do several cardiac cycles until you've actually completed. And if that goes well, you have different frames which are filled up over time. And then you do an inverse Fourier transform to get into the spatial domain. But if ECG mistriggering is happening, you start swapping different temporal frames with each other. So rather than having filling up the frames at the right place in time through cardiac cycle, you actually start swapping different frame case baselines coming from different temporal times. And then you see a corrupted frame as appearing on the top right. So the problem is, if we work on nice databases like we do, we use a UK Biobank for that, we have tens of thousands of high quality images of volunteers. So actually we are not likely to see that phenomenon very often. In the clinic, however, we are much more likely to have poor quality images because we've got patients who are, of course, anxious, who have breathing problems, who have a cardiac condition, and all these kinds of artifacts like mistriggering are much more likely to happen. So having understood how that problem works, we can actually turn that to our advantage. We can take good quality images, of which we've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands now even, and apply different corruption levels of case space. And we can really do it as little or as much corrupted as we want. And we can gradually deteriorate the image quality to generate poor quality images, but paired with the original high quality images, which allows us to actually train an algorithm to reverse that process. And that's quite similar to what people do in computer vision, where you augment the data. We don't maybe have enough different cats in your training set, so you start wriggling them around, translate, rotate. Of course, we do that in addition to this more physically motivated data augmentation. So how can we use that? Well, we train deep neural networks to do image quality control. So we can use that for database curation. We can just classify images as being good or bad because we have enough good and bad examples. But what's more interesting is we want to do also motion reconstruction to avoid rescanning the patients. And we want to solve further downstream tasks, maybe at the same time, segmentation or disease classification. So for image quality control, we treat our images as like cats or dogs. We say, is there a cat in the image or is there a dog in the image? Here we just train them on, say, is it good or poor quality? And we can use our normal, simple encoder architecture for that. For motion reconstruction, we can use a UNet style architecture, an encoder-decoder network, and actually revert the process of having a motion blurred image if you want, or another artifact image, and turn that into a high quality image using our data augmentation to have these pairs for training. But we can also do that directly from K-space, which is quite interesting because then you kind of skip one step and actually tackle the problem where it actually occurs. We know that the K-space is corrupt, so we don't even need to go into the spatial domain. We can try to actually do something actively about displaced K-space lines because this is where the problem occurs. And for that, to do that, one needs to be a little bit aware of how MR scanning works. And one thing that people are working a lot in reconstruction in order to achieve also accelerated imaging is to use undersampling. So to make imaging faster, people revert to just, use some undersampling trajectory, just use a sparse set of K-space lines, which should be sampled. Everything else stays at zero, is not filled. You can do zero filling and the Fourier inverse Fourier transform, which would look normally quite terrible. But you can also train networks to actually do a high resolution reconstruction and following this undersampling trajectory. Knowing that, well, we have actually a fully sampled acquisition, not an undersampled acquisition, and we have this displacement of K-space lines, but still fully sampled. What we can do is we can apply a detection network, which tells us which lines are wrong, throw these lines simply away, and then just do accelerated reconstruction. So it's basically similar to doing compressed sensing on undersampled data, but using deep learning for that. The next step, of course, is to say, well, why do we want to actually do that? Do we want to just produce pretty images which look nicer, or do we actually want to extract some clinically meaningful information? Of course, one thing we want to do is to segment the heart, because then we can calculate ejection fraction and derive other clinical parameters. So in this case, we couple what we did before. We have our 2D plus time corrupted K-space. We identify which K-space lines are corrupted, we apply our data consistency. We get really nice outputs, but we can also couple that with an additional segmentation network. That's a simple UNet style architecture, which is at the same time also optimizing over the segmentation loss. So we actually have a joint training objective on the detection loss, the reconstruction loss, and the segmentation loss, and do everything in one go. The nice thing what we found in this approach is not only did it improve the segmentation, it also improved the reconstruction. So it could potentially be used as a general purpose reconstruction segmentation network, even if the data quality is high. Here are just some examples. On the bottom left, you see a severely degraded image. The difference to the original, because in this case we just tested it on data where we had good quality data and artificially degraded it. The poor quality segmentation coming out of that if we just do a subsequent segmentation. And on the bottom right, you see our jointly reconstructed and segmented images and the difference image to the original high quality image. And of course, we tested on real poor quality images as well. And there we of course only can visually assess how good the reconstruction is, but we have a ground truth segmentation against which we can compare. You can take this a step further, where you can actually start putting all these things in very long integrated pipelines. This pipeline only looks at reconstructed images, so you could imagine whatever I've done before could be linked to that as well. But where there's an image quality check at the beginning, so you classify images first, whether they are good enough or not good enough to be accepted or rejected. You then do a segmentation across the entire cardiac cycle, and then start extracting all these clinical parameters, ventricular volume curves and left ventricular volume and so on. And then you have another output quality control step. So you're getting closer and closer to the clinician here and looking also at a consistency of the filling and ejection points and the LV and left ventricular and right ventricular volume consistencies and ventricular function. So we start putting together all these individual modules, but integrating them further and further to really customize them to individual patients. So the second part, where I've got just a few minutes to spend, is on AI-enabled lung cancer imaging. You heard about lung cancer this morning as well, so I hope you can link back to that. And one key problem with lung cancer is that it is detected too late. It's usually detected by the time patients are symptomatic. It's mostly detected in the accident emergency unit and not at normal standard health checks. And the problem is that if you want to actually look at these images first on the right, these are real images taken from the National Lung Screening Trial in North America. And you see a patient who has been under observance. It was really a randomized control trial where nothing was done. There was no intervention. There was a huge ethical thing to do that. But you see on the right-hand side, the patient has a tumor detected. And if you go back in time, you actually see it slowly emerging. So these images have been only very crudely aligned. So you might actually look like looking slightly at a wrong or tilted plane, but you actually probably would not see the tumor in image A. You might think something suspicious at image B and keep it under observation. At image C, you actually find it. So if you were able to spot something like image B, or maybe even image A, rather than all the way down to image C, when the patient is presented to us for maybe a screening, we could actually dramatically improve treatment options for that patient and save lives. The problem is we don't have many instances of the earlier versions of that lung nodule shown in C, so we have to do something about that. So again, we would have lots and lots of healthy images, from people having, say, a bicycle accident or a cardiac problem who've had a chest CT, but we don't have any lung nodules to follow up on. And we have then only lung cancer patient on the other end, where we only have really very well developed nodules and tumors already, so we can't really go back in time for those. So what we do is taking a really patient-centered approach, where we look at each patient individually. And what we do is we kind of hypothesize how image A would look like if we only had image C, because we've got plenty of images C there. What we do is taking a two-step approach. We perform what's called in-painting of the larger nodules to obtain image pairs with and without nodules, so real image C and a hypothesized image A. We then generate smaller nodules like image B. There's just something in between, and then we use that to solve further downstream tasks. So we want to detect small nodules, classify small nodules, and so on. Because right now our algorithms are mostly geared towards detecting or classifying larger nodules. So there's lots of homework still left to do. So the first step in painting is, again, just operating on a single patient. So it's not a training database. We just optimize on a single patient, but using a deep learning method developed by Ulyanov. It's called deep image priors, where we actually reconstruct the image at the position of where the nodule is. Basically, you can think of this as a magic little paintbrush. And here's just one example of a nodule which has disappeared of the in-painting. I mean, it's like a kind of slightly sophisticated paint shop, which actually takes a patient context into account. Here are just some example where you see the original nodules on the top row, then the pseudo healthy images generated in the middle row, and then you see the absolute difference appearing. So you actually see where the nodule was. It's not perfect, but what we want to generate is just some pseudo healthy images, which allows to train algorithms on the first and the second row. So for the second step, we want to generate early stage lung nodules, and we're using or adopted a paper by Gilpin on cellular automata using convolutional neural networks. And there's a really nice online demo if you're interested. I can point you to that, where you can actually again train on a single image without a training database and regenerate what has been in the image at that place before. So that is helping us to really generate using cellular automata by training on this similar image and reconstruct the original nodule from a growing seed. And here you see just the pipeline. I can point you to the ISB paper, which has just come out earlier on that. And here are just some examples. So you see different generations of the cellular automaton going through, and you see the in-painted version, the healthy pseudo-healthy image on the far left, and you see the original image on the far right. And you can actually see that we can actually fairly nicely reconstruct the nodule at the end. But what's more important is we actually have some intermediate results which we can paste into the original image and use that for training. Here are just some movies which I will just let run for a moment, where you can see the nodules growing as we generate them. And here's just some final application result where we actually prove false positive detection of small nodules using our data augmentation on a public data set. So in conclusion, AI-enabled imaging has really the potential to be transformative in healthcare. We can use it along the entire imaging pipeline and use it from the image sensor right down to diagnostic and prognostics. We can use it to improve image quality or do image quality control, and it's quite nice to use some physically motivated data augmentation for that. And we can also use you can generate data for augmentation for rare diseases or small data sets or different image protocols, which might help us also allow to solve the domain shift problem. And we can, of course, looking forward, we should combine all this with non-imaging data, biomarkers, patient health records, and so on. I'd like to acknowledge all my fantastic collaborators on that who've actually done most of this work. And if you want to find out more of this field, we're running in Scandinavia a conference, but of course it's virtual in Rønne and Bornholm, workshops at MICCAI. We're taking MICCAI to Africa in 2024, and we've got a new journal on machine learning biomedical imaging, which is a free open access archive overlay journal, which welcomes your submission. Thank you very much. Tak.
Thank you, Julia. So we have a couple of questions for you from the audience. One very interesting. Can you provide some insight or tips on how you facilitate collaboration between clinicians and technologists in your lab?
Yes, so we've taken the approach that our PhD projects are associated always with a clinician as well. So one of the supervisors, a third supervisor maybe, should be a clinician. That's important. The other thing is that, well, I've had the benefit in working in a very integrated biomedical engineering environment where actually clinicians are my colleagues. So we've got clinicians being lecturers in our department. So it's basically our day-to-day connection, but that's quite unique. It doesn't happen always like this. I think trying to do things like shared lab spaces, hot desking at the hospital, engaging clinicians early in the project discussion, trying to form like a common language, because it's quite hard sometimes to get our concepts across. Medical imaging has the advantage it's quite visual. We can show images, but we have to learn from them as much as they have to learn from us. And I'm quite confident. I've had now the first radiologist sitting in my machine learning lectures and doing, some of our software problems as well. So we'll have a new generation of radiologists. I think it's the technologists who have to catch up and actually have some of the more relevant clinical, basic skills, like understanding at least of imaging physics in my field as part of their syllabus as well.
Thank you. Another question. Can you say something about if these techniques have found application in the clinic, or if you're about to experience the transition from research to clinical application?
I've just read this morning, I can't remember where actually, that it takes about 17 years from developing an idea to actually translate it, say, to a commercial product. 17 years, so that's not the lifetime of a PhD. It's hardly the well, maybe my lifetime as an academic, not even. So it takes a very long time. But I think that's not how it works. It's not you yourself who do that. It's actually you pass it on to the next person who's actually starting a little bit later down the track. So actually you'll see little ideas happening earlier, and it's engaging. We are engaging close with healthcare industry, which is important. They're important for the rollout, and again with clinicians who are more willing now to try out things. I personally haven't got anything which is really used on a patient, I'm embarrassed to say, but that's probably the case for a lot of my colleagues. But those who are working in interventions, in surgical data science, I think it might be happening a bit quicker because a bit more practical, more really working directly with patients. We do a lot of things retrospectively still at this point, but we do some prospective testing on patients, on volunteers, or patient volunteers, I should say. They are patients. But it's a long road to success.
Thank you, Julia, and we sure hope to see you back in Tromsø for Midnight Sun or Northern Lights conferences in the future. So we are about to go for lunch now, 1 hour lunch break. Just going to inform you that this report from Big Med is available. For those of you who are here in Tromsø, I'm sure it's available online as well. Vibeke Binds is going to talk about the experiences from Big Med later on. And, you know, lunch, same as yesterday, COVID still. If you don't remember, go talk to Ira and check if you have dementia. See you in an hour.